Hello, good afternoon and good morning to everyone, depending where you are globally. Welcome to this joint webinar with Dell Technologies and DXC Technology. My name is Nav Singh. I'm the Head of Marketing Communications for Banking and Capital Markets here at DXC. I have the pleasure of being joined today for this Industry Insights-led event with industry experts from Dell and DXC, starting off with Andy Haig, who's the Head of Banking and Capital Markets for EMEA for DXC Technology, Dave Spence, who's the Global Security Solutions Lead at DXC Technology, and Jim Shook, who's the Global Director of Cybersecurity and Compliance Practice at Dell Technologies. The key gist of today's event is really focused around the fact that in these special circumstances, shall we say, cyber events, the loss of critical data, and the ultimate consequences as a result of a cyber event are a key risk factor to financial services as a whole. Finding a solution that can without effort and in real-time secure data is absolutely imperative. Today, in this engaging and thought-provoking discussion, Dell and DXC Technologies will discuss how to secure critical data for customers, colleagues, branch, or the platform and the end users during a cyber event. A key focus would be how to achieve cyber resilience by protecting critical data and how to maximize the native security functionality of current deployment to simplify and reduce risk, determining where cyber sits in financial crime, and much more. So before I go to the questions, I want to start off with a poll question for the audience. And the question over here is, if you can read, why are you worried and what are you worried most about when it comes to data loss? So please give your answers, and there are 5 options there for you to choose from. Some interesting results coming in already. Large-scale data loss seems to be a massive seems to be a big imperative, very crucial point over there. I'll give it just 10 more seconds. So interesting choice. Just over 50% of the results over here showcase that large-scale data loss is a massive concern for many of the people in banking capital markets. Around a quarter of you said losing a data center is a big concern, and equal number of respondents said corruption of backup tapes as well as consolidation of data loss is a critical concern as well. Now, with that in mind, I would like to ask the first question pointed to Andy to say that, the security landscape for financial services has changed significantly. Companies have become very acute to risk, have made significant investments in all elements of the ecosystem, customer, colleague, and the branch when it comes to critical loss of data. How can we better secure the financial services ecosystem, in your opinion, Andy? And how does it seem to you to prevent critical data loss?
Thank you, Nav, and welcome everybody. Good afternoon. So just to answer that question, actually, and we'll defer some of the solutions that sit behind that to Jim and the team. It's probably worth actually covering a bit more about the context to data loss, cyber security, and cyber vulnerability in the banking and capital markets ecosystem. So the way I'd break it down, and some of it's fairly obvious when you kind of bring it all together, you've got one swim lane which is around outside of the industry, directly influences the industry from a threat perspective. If we take recent events, some of them aren't that recent anymore, right? In terms of Ukraine situation, the war in Ukraine, the Ukraine crisis and revenge attacks, we've seen an increase level of attacks onto even public sector areas, Norway being a classic example the last couple of weeks. You've then got, with the cost of living increase, the cost of fuel prices, you're seeing an increased amount of crime, financial crime, cyber fraud that's surfacing. It even goes back to the amount of theft on a fuel call versus the correlation to financial crime that we're seeing in the banking and market sector. So you've got, where there's strain and there's cost of living, you're going to see an increased amount of fraud and cyber crime off the back of that. Now, equally, hackers are using AI, automation, machine learning, quantum computing to attack. Ransomwares we're seeing spike. We talk about on the poll around large-scale data loss is one of the biggest concerns. DXC itself was attacked from a ransomware 2 years ago and fought that off. Other companies, big corporates, weren't as secure and had a bigger impact. So the ransomware attacks and the threat levels were there 2-3 years ago, as we all know, and have certainly intensified. Now, if we then link that into the banking and capital markets or the financial services sector, or more broadly, in terms of what's driving some of the things for consideration as part of the solution, and also areas to focus on to make sure they're not weaknesses in financial services, what are the themes happening inside the industry? Well, we all know where banking is going, prominently on the retail and wealth asset management side. It's demand, on-demand access to data, all kinds, all sources, open banking, sharing personal data across multiple institutions. So I don't know what you use at home, but you might use banking via your core banking application. You might use other devices or technologies like Yolt, for example, to look at analytics on your same account. So your data is in more than one place. Your personal spend data is in more than one place. Your transactions are in more than one place. So that through that perspective, we've got to look about how we secure the wider remit of where your data sits. If you look almost on the opposite from inside the big retail institutions, your customer data sits in multiple places, and bringing it together so that you've got a central view of the customer, central view of you, central view of me. The reason why we do that, or the banks are driving towards that directive, is really simple. One single view of the customer, therefore cross-sell, looking at what products are best servicing that type of individual profile, so therefore that the retail organizations can put the greatest amount of cross-sell products across that customer. Bringing that together, does that make it more secure, where you can actually put an airlock effectively around that data? If your data is compromised, it's all in one place, versus where it sits across different parts of the organization and distributed different areas, where you might have data over here for credit, unsecured credit, different data over here for motor finance, etc. So that model is changing, and security needs to be part of the evolution of that, in the way that the customer's data is then centralized to be benefited around cross-sell and MIOps that sits on top of that. Our banks are always open for business. They have been for a while. More and more organizations have moved towards that, again, more so in the customer onboarding around asset and wealth. Retail banking has been in that space for a long time. So the shop front is constantly open, and there's a major consideration around security. Transactions, equally, transactions are emanating out of everywhere. So, again, nothing new, but it all compounds to the way that we've got to look around cybersecurity and fraud. My watch pays is capable of transacting, my phone, my wallet, and it will be car and smart wallets. So actually following that path in terms of whether a smart wallet can persist, wherever transactions can originate, is equally part of the consideration about not just securing now, but looking forward. And then you've got the classics that we've been talking about for a while: remote working, working from home. Actually, if you look at the difference between branch and colleague, a lot of individuals are able to do branch activities from home rather than in the branch. There's nothing new in that. That's evolved over the last couple of years, as has the path to hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, and also a greater uptick in utility services. So actually going to a provider that is both hosting, running the application, running the services that sit on it, and present that back in some kind of transaction form. So again, it's outside of technically the banking's core classic security construct, that again is something for consideration. So in summary, cyber and security and data protection has never been more rife in terms of budget focus and part of the solutions that sit within the transformation agenda of these organizations. To kind of quote some of the numbers people may have seen from McKinsey, the cost of cybercrime or market costs are expected to grow 15% per year and will reach $10.5 trillion by 2025, which is only a couple of years away. Nearly all of medium and medium-sized enterprises are vastly upticking their cyber security spend over the next 2 years to try and keep up with that. And there's something like 3.5 million cyber security positions open worldwide, trying to provide the industry experts needed into organizations to keep up with that spend, to keep up with the defense that's needed. So there's a whole melting pot in there of where financial service is influenced by external factors directly, and also the transformation agenda that the financial services in, which is potentially creating hard points or weak points subject to that roadmap and how well security is stitched into the solutions as part of that transformation. Nav, over to you.
Andy, many thanks for those insights. Now, interesting point you mentioned over there, and I recall a quote you gave earlier was a lot of banks have product, but there's a lot of division, and division creates that segregation at the data level. It makes it more resilient, which is kind of like a well-known, and we were seeing this quite a lot during now, especially as the world is going through the so-called CUB effect, the COVID-19 pandemic, Ukraine crisis, and obviously Brexit. And banks can interlay the machine learning operations or have a view of the customer so that they can put other products in front of the customer. How does that finesse, do you think, from your point, in regards to a single customer view? And so, you know, how can security be more tightened in those respects?
Well, I guess if you've got all of the customer's details in one place, you can double down on the way that you secure that. And again, I'll turn over to Dave and the team and Jim to go through their view on this. I think it's a case of, if you think of it from a house perspective, if you can secure the windows and the doors, do you need a panic room, right? Do you prevent, or put all of the effort in preventing any compromise, or do you also have a safe airlock for the data that sits in behind that sort of defensive layer? If customer details are all in one place, then it should be easier for an organization to secure that data. Equally, you know, if it was compromised, then you've obviously got compromise on your entire data set. But by virtue of it being centralized, should mean it should be industrialized, means that you should be able to put a stronger safety net around that central customized data. Dave, Jim, any additions to that?
It's a good point. I think it talks to a key topic of trust, and there's a real, you know, businesses are only as good as the decisions are only as good as the data that you use to make them, and the businesses, banks and people are making decisions every day about the state of their finances, the health of their finances, what they can do, what they can afford. And the regulators and investors, people outside the banking organizations, are also looking at that for, you know, kind of signals around market health, health of the institutions. And, you know, the underlying concept of trust in the data is fundamental. And I think it goes to, so people are, you know, going back to the survey there was earlier at the start, the kind of large scale data loss type event. And that's a kind of almost a cyber black swan event, where a lot of the existing business continuity and disaster recovery practices in more traditional organizations, they weren't developed to be able to cope with the kind of black swan type events. So there's a lot of the recovery point objectives, recovery time objectives, all these things that are set up there. The business relies on the fact that IT can recover the data and recover the system within 6 hours or 12 hours or whatever that is. But what if, so the real kind of black swan type event is, well, what if you just can't recover the data? What if it's just not possible? You can ransomware encryption. It's just not possible to actually recover it. It's interesting that one of the scariest things for not the individuals necessarily, but more of the institutions and regulator angle on a lot of this is not necessarily the kind of availability of the underlying data, the kind of large-scale data loss. But I think what's more significant for them would be a large-scale data integrity issue. Kind of trust in the data. How would you, if financial institutions were going around supporting and making financial transactions, loans, deposits, credits, moving money around, but then they found out they had a problem, but weren't able to pinpoint exactly when that problem started. How could you unwind 2 days, 3 days, a week of financial transactions between institutions? And that's the kind of data integrity is also an integral part of that, and it's a critical concern to, in particular, the regulators, as well as the one of the other topics that came up was sort of consolidation of some of the risk. And I do think banking and capital markets has been slower than some industries and sectors in the move to the cloud. There's been quite a number of regulatory hurdles, privacy hurdles, to slow down some of the cloud adoption. But again, it's individually and institutionally, there's a lot of value in moving to the kind of hyperscale cloud providers. But at a macro level, across the market and systemic resilience and importance, there's each individual sort of bank is putting their eggs in a couple of different baskets, but overall across the ecosystem, all those eggs are just collecting in one or two baskets of the hyperscalers. And how to get some level of data resilience and real kind of integrity, understanding and integrity in the data to support the kind of cyber black swan type events. That's critical. Institutions have a view of how they do that, how they manage that, and also regulators are starting to look at that. And there's some impending legislation in Europe under the DORA Act to bring sort of more managed service providers under the sweep of regulatory scrutiny for financial services. I think it's a very interesting time, very interesting time that we live in with all the activity that's going on. Jim, was there anything?
Yeah, no, great comments. And I had one high level thought, Andy, that hit me as you were talking about that, and that's really how these issues are no longer cyber issues, they're business issues. So as you do anything, if you're consolidating data so you can get a better view of your customer, that has impact, positive or negative, across the business, including the cyber area. And if cyber is doing things to protect data, that has impact on the business. And so I'm encouraged how much more I see cybersecurity and resilience teams working directly with the business and the lines of business than, say, 2.5, 3 years ago. But we still have a ways to go, and I think your point exactly brings that out.
Interesting. Thank you, Dave and Jim, for that. But Dave, if I may come back to you on exactly your point over there, would it be possible to explore some of the solutions to some of the challenges and maybe look at some of the bad actors, and the responses of how we can utilize the areas of the afterthought as a potential for transition around the branch, customer and colleague, and especially what and how we think as a banking institute, for example, how we can integrate and invest that data so it provides a better viewpoint of the customer, colleague at the branch.
Sure, I can explore that a bit more. Nav, could you put up the first slide, please? There was a little bit of content. So I'm sure you've all seen something similar before. So I'm sure you've all seen something similar before. Just major kind of threats. What are the things out there to worry about? And a number of these they mean different things to data, and what that means. Crime is generally sort of manipulation of data, theft of data, the kind of sandboxed cyber vaults and the backups of data is less of an important kind of mitigation for some of the overall kind of crime, theft, potentially around extortion with with ransomware. One of the key things with ransomware is it's usually a double-edged sword now. They steal stuff and then they encrypt the data that's there. And so, if you don't have some kind of way of recovering a lot of that, then you kind of suffer the double effects of business interruption, which can be a significant problem, as well as trying to get the data back or stop them kind of leaking it. So even with the kind of concepts around having real offline kind of vaulted standalone backups that you can trust, that you can recover from, they cover a lot of the business interruption angles around the critical systems and services that banks run. The systemically important parts for the business and for the ecosystem as a whole, but there's still the potential risk around some of the extortion type threats. But at least you've got the data, you can trust it, you can recover into a number of different situations and scenarios. Some of the other challenges more towards the right hand scale of the spectrum on here, some of the challenges that I was talking about earlier in terms of systemic importance, and there's there have been some events, particularly around kind of espionage, terrorism, kind of nation state, where they get what we call capability prepositioning. So they'll look to get into somewhere that they want to disrupt at a future point in time. So they'll kind of put their assets in place, which could be insiders, but more often than not in the cybersphere is some kind of implant remote access, some kind of ability to get into the environment, and they wait. And we've seen this in a couple of industries, particularly focused around sort of critical national infrastructure, where they'll then wait, and maybe they will never do anything. But if there comes a point where there's heightened tension between countries, with some of the effects that Nav mentioned earlier, particularly the Ukraine crisis, that's an area where particularly some of the nation states and higher end espionage groups, they might look to flip a switch and do something, and that could be taking down multiple institutions, taking data offline, systems offline, or if they have the right kind of access, introducing some kind of data integrity issues into some of the operational, some of the financial, operational and systemically important systems. So that's the very different aims and goals across the spectrum of bad actors. But for a lot of these, the critical importance for the institutions is the ability to recover quickly key business operations to a trusted point. And they're really the key things that you're looking for, which the solutions like the Cyber Vault really help enable in terms of the ability to recover critical systems to a trusted point. In terms of the impact around the kind of customer branch, other areas, customers these days, it's predominantly kind of mobile, probably kind of a lot of mobile first banking. A lot of the data is central. So, if you have the ability to recover it centrally, they can have a bit of an interruption for a day or two, maybe a little bit of time where the app's not working, but they could still get there, they could still see it. The branches, there's some institutions I know that they have moved more to cloud environments, and cloud-enabled apps to support delivery of branch-type services. So again, in there, that's something which can, if that's the kind of transformation that organizations have been through, the ability to recover service and keep service running is improved by that with the kind of backups that Jim, the kind of backups and systems processes recovery that Jim will talk about a bit. And for the institution and regulators, that having the data, being able to recover the critical data, trusted point, is exactly what they're looking for in terms of building and maintaining trust. Nav, could you go on, please? We've spoken about some of this before in terms of potential business implications. I think I'm not going to talk about a number of these directly, but just one thing from a very real incident. One of the real life challenges when an organization had a large scale data loss was actually, not necessarily some of the things in here, kind of maybe in cost of remediating activity, but when working at a large multinational shipping company that had a large-scale data loss event, and one of their biggest problems was actually at the get-go having contact data. It may sound simple, email addresses, phone numbers, the ability to understand who in the business can do what and how to communicate with them. Central loss of systems and something as simple as contact data can really curtail the recovery efforts in terms of getting the business back up to speed. So it's not necessarily the types of data that you think that might be most important at the time. There's obviously the system data, financial data, customer data, people data, but there's also the data that's critical to the operational recovery of the business and the systems. And it's something which can regularly get missed, but is key. Could we go on, please? And this, this is something that I've spoken about, I guess, the difference between the disaster recovery and business continuity and kind of true cyber resilience for large scale kind of black swan, as mentioned, kind of cyber events, where it's been working with a lot of the businesses in some financial institutions, and a lot of their business recovery processes, how they think they're going to recover the business, absolutely rely on the SLAs with IT. So that's going to be the recovery time. How quickly can IT say they can recover? What point can they recover to? Is it the last hour, last period of time? What kind of things are IT, the SLAs that IT are providing back out to the business? But in my experience, not enough of the business areas have really necessarily thought about, well, what happens if IT can't? What happens if there's a bigger problem? What happens if we've got to recover data going back a week because we can't trust it? And it's those kind of events that effectively fall out, planning for outside of the standard business continuity and disaster recovery type events that quite often gets overlooked, but is in the kind of events that were indicated of worry and interest at the start. The areas where there's going to be the biggest potential impact, and something which the business really need to think about and coordinate with, because it's also coordinated recovery across IT. Which business is most important? Which systems in which businesses are most important? How do you recover them in which order? Maybe data dependencies between some of them. If you're recovering one to a point in time, do all of them have to be recovered to the same point in time to avoid issues and data clashes down the line? But really thinking and looking at the resilience rather than just the kind of business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning is key. And I think now at this point, I was going to hand back to yourself and Jim, perhaps talk a bit more about some of the technicalities around the Dell technology.
Yep, absolutely. So thank you very much. Thanks for that, Dave. Interesting you should mention about the ability to trust data and cut down on the operational impact, because that's important. At that point, I think I want to pass over to Jim, yourself, get your thoughts on how does the Dell Vault assist, and if there are any examples you can share, any lessons we can learn, why the Vault helps, and any concrete situations where we need to be aware in financial services, and especially in regards to the cover effects, as I mentioned before. If you can maybe divulge a little bit on how customers are struggling with resilience and how they can focus on the solutions.
That's great lead up there, and Dave said a couple things I wanted to follow up on that I thought were really great. So my focus is on ransomware and destruction and helping organizations plan ahead to have these recover capabilities. That really falls under what you would now call the cyber resilience umbrella, and goes back to the point that Andy made earlier about the business. So it's no longer just in the cybersecurity space or just in IT or anywhere else. These issues are now business issues, and we need everybody pulling together and thinking about these things. So Dave, the point that you made that I thought was so great was the business in many cases looking at these capabilities is relying on SLAs that they've obtained from often the infrastructure team related to backup and DR. And those aren't going to work, right? They weren't ever meant for cyber issues. Even you talk about black swan events, absolutely. So what if there's another NotPetya? What if it hits systems that are more common to banks instead of the Windows systems that NotPetya attacked several years ago? We could have a cascading effect. But even wholesale or sophisticated attacks are going to take out these backup DR infrastructure type systems. They're not meant to withstand a focused cyber attack, let alone hands-on keys, bad actors who are just super sophisticated. So that goes back to, again, that kind of my theme I keep harping on. We've got to get these groups together. When you talk about cyber resilience, it has to be the business, it has to be IT, it has to be the cyber teams, so that we can expose these concerns and these false reliance that we have on some of these systems that really are not going to help in these cyber attacks. So what do we do? I think it begins with understanding that landscape. That's a great slide you had up there about the different, we had up earlier about the different types of attacks. We can't think just about run-of-the-mill garden variety ransomware that people deploy. You have to think about the insider. You have to think about the attack that isn't there to extract money, it's there to destroy you for whatever reason, and guard against all those attacks. And that takes a little different level of thinking. We started to have a little bit of discussion on the aspects of data that have to be protected. So the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of data. We've always had people stealing the data, impacting the confidentiality. Ransomware and destruction brought about the availability concern, along with denial of service attacks that still happen, and haven't really had to deal with the wholesale integrity attacks where, what if we couldn't trust the data? It's still there, but we can't trust it anymore. So we've got to start planning ahead for those things and really understanding the landscape. So that's an awful lot, and I think where we like to focus is on taking one of those pieces and making them very easy. That is the ability to protect data and systems in a very strong manner, and then building up the processes to use that data and systems to recover if one of these attacks is successful. So that's what we talk about with Cyber Vault, and that I'm going to dive into a bit. So now that first slide, I think with Sheltered Harbor, this is a US-based organization, but I know from my work with a lot of banks in the UK and elsewhere, Singapore, Japan, Taiwan, Egypt, they are looking at or using many of the Sheltered Harbor ideas. And I won't spend a lot of time here, except number one, to recommend you kick this around a little bit if you're looking in this space. And number two, just to talk high level how they break this problem up into three parts. And you can see those here. So, the first part is, and we've touched on this, what are those systems that we need to protect? And really in the UK, with the exercise that just completed at the end of March, what are the business services that have to be protected that are most important? And then moving down from those into what are the IT infrastructure and systems that help us to deliver those systems. But ultimately the same thing, understand what it is that we need to protect. Sheltered Harbor has a very narrow use case, and so they're just looking at certain aspects of core banking. But as you look at this in the larger problem set, my financial system customers will look at core banking, payments, trading platforms. It really comes down to two things, and these are kind of listed throughout a lot of the regulations mainly in the US and UK. Number one, what are the systems that keep the doors open? What's making money? And kind of tied to that, what are reputational things? What do you need to have up and running to keep your reputation and your brand? And then the second piece is, what do we need to protect the system itself? So, we don't want any banks to fail, but how do we ensure that the overall banking system is protected if somebody gets attacked and we can continue to conduct business? That's a big kind of discussion in that first box. The second box is, okay, we want to have copies of data that we can use, and I say data loosely, it can be the databases, it can be the tier 0 infrastructure. It's bits and bytes. What is it that we need to protect to enable a recovery? And that second box is what aspects, what capabilities does a data vault need to have to actually be secure from all these attacks? And Sheltered Harbor has the best standard I've seen, the most details around what those requirements are going to be. And to Dave's point earlier, it's not DR and backup, they have their own purposes, but they're not going to survive the sophisticated attack. So what more do we need to do? That's the vaulting capability. And the third piece is really the recovery process. So if there is an event, we need to understand and we need to exercise how do we respond to this event, whether it's a contact list, right? Those things are very real in the height of an attack. How do I reach out to people? How do we communicate with them? Planning that ahead, understanding and integrating this into your incident response process is absolutely critical, and then exercising that. So those are the three aspects. I'm going to focus just on that second one. Again, we've talked about the cyber vault that Dell has partnered with DXC on, and we've made that very easy. So if we look at the next slide, let me give you kind of a quick overview here of what we're doing. We debated what level of diagram to have here, and I think this is a good one to just kind of start the conversation. But for those of you who have follow-up interest, your Dell and DXC teams can really get into the weeds on exactly what we're doing. So representation here is on the left side, we've got our basic IT systems. We're protecting those already with backups and DR. They might live, as Andy was pointing out, in the cloud, on-prem, certainly a lot of multi-cloud strategies. Doesn't really matter if they're important systems, they need to be backed up. They may need some DR capabilities, and then they need some kind of cyber recovery, cyber vaulting capabilities too. The way that we deliver that is we create a vault environment. That's that right side. And don't get too tied up on where that vault lives. It can really be anywhere. It can be on-prem. We can put it wherever it needs to be, and with DXC we can manage it. Or many of our customers look to manage portions of it on their own. But our focus here is on what does it take to make that vault secure. So what we do is we have a logically air-gapped environment, meaning the components in that vault are physically isolated, so very limited number of people can actually get to them if they had access to a data center, and then logically isolated in that the normal state is there's no connectivity at all into the vault. You think about your production environment, it can be breached pretty regularly by outside actors. With the vault, we actually cut the connectivity, so there's no interfaces that are even listening if somebody were to try to get access. We use private IP address space and things like that. So that's the normal state is off, but we need to turn it on every once in a while so we can update what's in that vault. As Dave was talking about recovery points, those are really important. So we need to update the data that we have in that vault to meet whatever recovery point concerns or obligations that we have. But we have to do that securely. So with the vault environment, we automate that from the vault side. So there's no access from the outside. There's no controls if you're outside of the vault. We automate that process of bringing up a connection. And this is where we start to get a little bit in the weeds. We're still separating the control plane from the data plane. So when we open that vault, we do so from an interface that's only accessed on the vault side, automated under a policy, and we only open a connection that allows a data replication path. And so that's the separation of the control plane from the data plane. Now we bring over any data that has changed, and if somebody's on the outside going, oh, the vault's open, and they try to get in, they can't, because there's nothing listening. There's no SSH daemon running. There's no port that enables that traffic to even flow over. So it's just the data. And when that comes in, we lock that vault down and we lock the data and we analyze the data. So those are the three important pieces there. And so the capabilities you have to focus on are what we call the 3 I's. And you have to have all 3 of these to have a secure vault. And those are the things that we've implemented in this vault: isolation, immutability, and intelligence. The isolation I've covered. which is that air gap, the logical air gap that we bring on, but just as important, that the control is only from the vault side. You don't have a firewall that's being managed by some server that sits in production that can be compromised. And then the fact that we're separating the control plane from that data plane. Those are really critical keys to having true isolation. Isolation is not, I've got another copy of data in a different WAN or LAN, right? That's just not it. It has to be isolated from bad actor activity, even if those bad actors are insiders. The immutability, and I'm having discussions all the time with customers now who are using immutability controls in their production environment. So immutability is a storage platform capability that makes data that you identify as very difficult to delete during some retention period, which for vaulting capabilities tends to be a couple weeks to a month. So when we talk about resilience, if you've got a backup platform like our data domain that has retention locking capabilities, you can turn those on in production, and that's going to build a little bit of your resilience. But it's not the ultimate solution because the data is not necessarily invulnerable. It can still be attacked. But when we leverage that in a vault, so now we've isolated the vault, we bring our copies in, we apply that immutability, it's now stronger because it can't be accessed. So we're locking that out from insiders and other people who might somehow get access to the vault. The third piece is the intelligence. So with our CyberSense capability, when we bring that data into the vault, we interrogate the data to understand whether it's already been manipulated by a bad actor. We're not looking for malware. You're already doing that in production. You got a lot of tools out there. You know, certain malware, bad actors are smart. They recompile. It's a hash value nobody's ever seen before. It's dormant until it fires off. Nobody's going to find it in the normal case. We're not looking for that needle in a haystack. We're looking at the data saying, can I use this for recovery? So it kind of gets back to Dave's point about integrity of that data. We want to know before the attack happens which copies of data and applications I can use for recovery and which ones I might have to go back to a prior copy that I've retained in the vault. So this vault operates day over day. You maintain usually a couple weeks to a month. And what's so great about time to value, partnering with DXC on this, is we can deliver that immediately. The managed service really takes that second step, that data vaulting capability, out of play in terms of having to plan and structure all that work and get things deployed, and just makes it immediately deployable. So now you can focus on, okay, what do I need to put in the vault? And then with us helping, how do I use this to do the recovery process? So I know that's an awful lot to cover in a one short session here, but I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview on what we're doing and why we're doing it, and how we're partnering together to make this a lot simpler for our customers.
Thank you very much, Jim. That was really insightful. Please do feel free to send your questions in the chat, and we will endeavour to answer them during the Q&A session. But before I go to the Q&A session, firstly, I just want to say another thanks to Andy, to Jim, and to Dave for providing these useful insights. And I just want to go to the panelists one by one. If you can please provide a summary of your separate areas. So Andy, if you may start off, you spoke about the security landscape, and you spoke about the divisions and how those divisions can be resolved, how that division creates segregation at the data level, how can that be resolved in your single customer view. And obviously we saw Dave, you spoke about the securing the financial ecosystem, and finally we just saw Jim touch base on a very insightful way of how the actual DXC Dell vault works. So Andy, if I may come back to you, if you can please just give an overview of just summary of and key takeaways for the customer, colleague, and the branch.
So I think it kind of links back to some of the other conversations that we've had, where security now needs to be fully interlocked with any kind of transformation roadmap that the bank is undergoing. Whether it's around the core banking platform, the securitization of the data that underpins that core banking platform, and its ability to be resilient and spin back up if there is compromise, all the way through to how security features in the customer journey of the latest channel being built by any given retail bank. So I think it's a case of, security is not an afterthought anymore, and hasn't been for a couple of years, but it's now dead center to all of the transformation work that the banks are doing. And you're seeing, we've talked before around, how do you measure the return of investment on security, and should security be sat within specific areas of an organization or enterprise across all of it. So I think the key takeaway out of all of this is, it's very quick to look at the core banking platform, the customer journey, the new technology that's being used, but the key takeaway is making sure security is interlocked into all of that and help shape that rather than be a byproduct of it. It should be part of the early phases of that transition roadmap.
Thank you very much, Andy. So, Dave, any thoughts?
Just go over the key point of the trust. Sort of being able to trust the data is critical to all of the stakeholders, and a lot of the traditional views and approaches around disaster recovery and business continuity, they make a number of assumptions about how quickly and how well things can be recovered. And I think the real move and drive towards more of a cyber resilient organization, is starting to think about and put in place the right processes, technology, people, capabilities in order to move more towards resilience, as opposed to just managing through DR and BCP type SLAs, as Jim mentioned.
Thank you, Dave. And Jim?
I would say this is an area where, just to kind of sum up my comments, don't go it alone. It's a really important capability. It's a journey. It's not something you're going to complete in even a quarter or two. You might get things installed, you might hit certain capabilities, but cyber resilience is something you have to develop over time. So most of my customers will start small. They'll understand how these systems work. You can easily get bogged down in trying to classify all of your applications, and the better process is to find one that's important, understand how it works, and then grow your maturity from there. And it's never ending, because over time you're going to want to improve the security of your solution. You're going to have to keep an eye on the threat landscape, and then you're going to want to better understand and improve your RPOs and your RTOs from that cyber event. So just keep working at it. Let us know how we can help. And when you take a look at the capabilities that are out there, understand where they sit on the maturity level. Don't settle for something that's just going to protect you against garden variety attacks. You need something, especially for our financial clients and banks, that preserve in many ways all of our ways of life here, that you've got something that's secure.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jim. Thanks, Dave, and thanks, Andy. So I can see that there are no questions as of now. If you do have any questions, please feel free to write them down. But if you don't have any questions, then we are more than happy to answer those questions. We'll have a follow-up key takeaways document after this event. We'll have a recording of this event sent across to all the attendees and all those people who registered. And we will do a follow-up with an email. So should you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to everyone. I think there's a question over here. So we do have a question. So my customers talk about cyber insurance policies that mandate offline insurance, offline tape, which puts them off the benefits of a vault. What would you say to those companies that believe tape is enough? I think that might be a question. Jim, you want to maybe take that?
Yeah, I'll start. Great question. I've been working a lot with cyber insurers globally to help them better understand what capabilities are out there and what they really need to focus on to kind of box in their risk. Tape has been something that we hear about a lot. It's just, I don't know what it is. It's the caveman in us. It's offline, and so it's protected, and it's really not. The catalog tends to be online. We've seen it many times. The catalog gets attacked. We've seen if the tape's going off site, you must have a decryption key. We've seen those keys get deleted in an attack. Insiders, the tape can go out blank or never come back. And of course, recovery process, you can make all kinds of arguments. It can be slow. I think for an enterprise of any real size, it's really not a viable option. I don't think it's very secure. And even though it kind of strikes you as being secure because it's offline, it's just not a good tool. So when you have something like a vault that's designed properly, you get the benefits of having things that are offline, but you get the speed of recovery, you get the analytics capability, you get those other components that are really going to help. So I'm not going to argue that. I see those requirements too sometimes for insurers, and maybe that works for a mom and pop or very small business, just getting something off on tape and put it outside, but it doesn't work for an enterprise.
Great, thank you, Dell Technologies, and to Jim for taking your time and for attending this event, as well as to Andy and to Dave as well. We hope you enjoyed the insightful insights provided by the experts on this panel, and we look forward to seeing you again at the next panel. Thank you very much.